The champagne flowed freely through the marble-floored penthouse as Trevor Blackwood raised his glass to the gathered crowd of investors, colleagues, and social climbers who'd come to celebrate his promotion to senior partner at Morgan & Associates. The city lights of Manhattan glittered 40 stories below, casting a golden glow across the rich spectrum of brown faces who'd spent years climbing the same ruthless ladder Trevor had just conquered. He stood at the center of it all, his dark skin gleaming under the crystal chandeliers, his tailored suit sharp enough to cut glass. His smile practiced and predatory. To success, he declared, his voice carrying that particular timbre of someone who'd never been told no. And to leaving behind everything and everyone who couldn't keep up. Laughter rippled through the room. Though some of it sounded uncertain, Trevor's eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on his new girlfriend, Veronica, her deep mahogany skin draped in designer silk and diamonds that caught the light like tiny fires against her dark complexion. She approached him with the confidence of someone who knew she was being watched. Her long braids swept over one shoulder, sliding her hand possessively around his arm. "You were always too good for her anyway," Veronica said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Her voice dripped with the kind of cruelty that often masquerades as honesty among certain circles. What good is a wife who can't even give you children? Barren women shouldn't waste successful men's time. The word hung in the air like poison. Barren. Trevor had used it himself, hadn't he? During the divorce proceedings, he'd thrown it at Olivia like a weapon, watched it land and destroy something fundamental in her eyes. He'd blamed her for the emptiness of their 5-year marriage, for the silence in their too large apartment, for his own growing dissatisfaction with a life that looked perfect but felt hollow. That's right, Trevor agreed, emboldened by alcohol and the approval in Veronica's eyes. 5 years with Olivia and nothing. Just excuses and doctor's appointments that went nowhere. I told her she was barren, useless for what matters. Best decision I ever made, cutting that dead weight loose. More laughter now, though it was scattered, uncomfortable. Some guests shifted on their feet, suddenly interested in their drinks. Trevor's colleague, James, a tall man with close-cropped hair and worry lines etched into his forehead, opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again, his jaw tight with what might have been disgust or cowardice, perhaps both. The elevator chimed. The sound cut through the conversation like a knife through silk. All eyes turned toward the entrance as the door slid open with mechanical precision. The laughter died in throats. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. Olivia Harper stood in the elevator doorway, but she wasn't alone. She wore a simple navy dress that somehow made her look more elegant than everyone in the room combined. Her natural hair styled in an elegant updo that framed her warm brown face. Her skin seemed to glow with a health and confidence that hadn't been there during her marriage to Trevor. But it wasn't Olivia that made the room fall into stunned silence. It was the 4 babies. 2 were cradled in her arms, wrapped in soft blankets of pale yellow and mint green, their tiny brown faces peaceful in sleep. Behind her, a woman Trevor didn't recognize pushed a custom double stroller containing 2 more infants, all 4 of them no more than a few months old. The babies were beautiful, with Olivia's delicate features and dark, curious eyes that seemed to take in the shocked faces around them with infant wisdom. The silence stretched like taffy, pulling tighter and tighter until someone's champagne glass slipped from nerveless fingers and shattered against the marble floor. The sharp crack of breaking crystal seemed to restart time. Trevor's face seemed to darken with shock, his confident posture collapsing inward. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Beside him, Veronica's perfectly made-up face twisted into something ugly and confused. "Hello, Trevor," Olivia said, her voice calm and clear as a bell on a winter morning. She stepped into the penthouse with the easy confidence of someone who had nothing left to fear. "I heard you were celebrating. I thought it was time we had a conversation about exactly who's barren and who's not." The woman with the stroller, whom Trevor now recognized as Olivia's sister Claire, her darker complexion and broader features marking their family resemblance, smiled with the sharp edges of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. She positioned the stroller carefully, making sure everyone in the room could see all 4 babies clearly. "These are my children," Olivia continued, her voice steady despite the trembling Trevor could see in her hands. "Conceived through IVF 6 months after our divorce was finalized. 4 beautiful, healthy babies that I carried and delivered. Quadruplets, actually. The fertility clinic called it a miracle. Turns out I wasn't the problem after all, Trevor." The room erupted into whispers, a storm of shocked voices that built from a murmur to a roar. Phones appeared in hands, camera flashes going off like fireflies in the growing darkness of Trevor's world. His promotion party, his moment of triumph, was transforming into something else entirely. Something that would be all over social media before the champagne went flat. "You," Trevor stammered, his carefully constructed facade crumbling like wet cardboard. "You can't just show up here. This is my celebration." "These people are my colleagues." "Were," someone muttered from the back of the crowd. Past tense might be more accurate after tonight. Olivia shifted one of the babies to her shoulder, patting the tiny back with practiced ease. The infant let out a small coo, a sound so pure and innocent it seemed to highlight exactly how ugly Trevor's words had been. She looked at him with eyes that held no anger. Only a kind of sad clarity that was somehow worse than rage. "I didn't come here to ruin your party, Trevor," she said quietly, though her voice carried to every corner of the now silent room. "I came because I spent 5 years believing your lies. 5 years thinking I was broken, defective, less than human because my body wouldn't give you what you wanted on your timeline. Do you know what that does to a person? To be told by someone who promised to love you that you're fundamentally worthless?" She paused, looking down at the baby in her arms, the infant's tiny fingers wrapped around her thumb. "It took me a year of therapy after our divorce to understand the truth. The problem was never my body, Trevor. It was yours. The fertility specialist made it very clear. Your sperm count was always too low for natural conception. You were the reason we couldn't have children, but it was so much easier to blame me, wasn't it? To make me the villain in your story so you didn't have to face your own inadequacy." The whispers grew louder, more pointed. Trevor felt dozens of eyes pouring into him, judging him, seeing him suddenly not as the successful man he'd spent years crafting himself to be, but as something smaller, more pathetic. A man who'd destroyed his wife's sense of self rather than admit his own shortcomings. "That's not," he started, but his voice cracked. "That's a lie." "You're lying. Am I?" Olivia reached into the designer diaper bag hanging from Claire's shoulder and pulled out a manila folder. She held it up so the room could see. "I have the medical records right here. Your records from the fertility clinic we went to together. The ones you told me were lost. The ones that clearly state your oligospermia diagnosis. Severely low sperm count, Trevor. The doctor told us both, remember? But you convinced me it was my fault anyway. You gaslit me for 5 years." A woman in the crowd, Dr. Patricia Monroe, one of the senior partners at Morgan & Associates with silver-streaked locks and sharp, intelligent eyes, stepped forward. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice cut through the noise like a scalpel. "Is this true, Trevor? Did you knowingly misrepresent medical information to your wife? Did you publicly defame her character based on false information?" Trevor's hands were shaking now. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the climate-controlled perfection of the penthouse. "This is a private matter. This is between Olivia and me. You all need to mind your own business." "It stopped being private when you called her Barren in front of all these people," James said, stepping forward to stand beside Dr. Monroe. His voice was firm now, no longer hesitant. "I've worked with you for 8 years, Trevor, and I've watched you throw Olivia under the bus more times than I can count. Always blamed her for your bad moods, your late nights, your failures. Said she was holding you back. But she wasn't the problem, was she? You were." Other voices joined in, a chorus of people who'd witnessed Trevor's treatment of Olivia over the years, who'd stayed silent out of professional courtesy or fear or simple apathy. But Olivia's appearance with her 4 beautiful babies had broken something open, made silence feel like complicity. Olivia held up her hand, and the room quieted. She had a presence now that she'd never possessed during her marriage, a kind of authority that came from having walked through fire and emerged intact. "I'm not here for revenge," she said, her voice gentle but unyielding. "I'm here because I needed you all to know the truth. Because Trevor is about to become a senior partner, which means he'll have power over other people's careers, other people's lives. And you deserve to know what kind of man he really is." She looked directly at Trevor then, and he couldn't meet her eyes. "You broke me, Trevor. For a long time I let you. I believed your lies, internalized your cruelty, made myself small so you could feel big. But I'm not that woman anymore. These babies saved my life, not because they proved my worth, but because fighting for them taught me I was always worthy. With or without them. With or without you." One of the babies in the stroller began to fuss, a small whimper that quickly grew into a full cry. Olivia didn't flinch. She simply handed the baby in her arms to Claire and lifted the crying infant from the stroller, rocking gently, murmuring soft reassurances. The maternal ease with which she moved, the obvious love in every gesture, was a stark contrast to Trevor's rigid paralysis. "I'm going now," Olivia said, once the baby had settled. "I said what I came to say. But before I leave, I want everyone here to understand something. Words matter. The way we treat people matters. Trevor called me Barren in public, tried to shame me, tried to make my supposed failure his badge of honor. And all of you laughed. All of you stood by and let it happen." She swept the room with her gaze, and more than a few people had the grace to look ashamed. "I hope next time someone tries to tear down another person to build themselves up, you'll remember this moment. Remember that the cruelest lies are often the ones we tell to hide our own inadequacies." Dr. Monroe stepped forward, her expression grave. "Trevor, we need to talk. Now, in private." Her tone made it clear it wasn't a request. The other senior partners in the room were already conferring in low voices, their faces hard with professional concern. A scandal like this, a character revelation like this, could damage the firm's reputation. More importantly, it raised serious questions about Trevor's judgment, his ethics, his fitness for leadership. As Olivia turned to leave, Veronica grabbed Trevor's arm, her nails digging into the expensive fabric of his suit. "You told me she was the problem," she hissed, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You said she was cold, unfeeling, couldn't give you what you needed." "You lied to me too," Trevor couldn't respond. He watched helplessly as Olivia walked back to the elevator, her sister beside her, the 4 babies, the living proof of his deception. Just before the doors closed, Olivia looked back one last time. There was no triumph in her expression, no gloating satisfaction. Just a quiet sadness, a recognition of all the years they'd both wasted on a lie. The elevator doors slid shut with a soft chime, and Olivia disappeared from Trevor's life for the second and final time. The party didn't recover. Within 15 minutes, guests were making excuses and heading for the exits, their departure hurried and awkward. The celebration that was supposed to cement Trevor's status as a rising star had instead become the night everyone would remember as his unmasking. Phone videos of the confrontation were already spreading through social media, the hashtags writing themselves. The court of public opinion was swift and merciless. Dr. Monroe and the other senior partners escorted Trevor to a private office. The conversation was brief and brutal. There would be an investigation, a review of his conduct, both personal and professional. His promotion was suspended pending the outcome. The firm couldn't afford to elevate someone whose judgment and character were so publicly questionable. The word termination hung in the air, unspoken but understood. Veronica left without saying goodbye, her designer heels clicking an angry rhythm across the marble as she vanished into the night, already deleting photos of herself and Trevor from her social media accounts. Trevor stood alone in the empty penthouse, surrounded by half-empty champagne glasses and the ruins of his carefully constructed life. The city lights still glittered below, indifferent to his downfall. He'd spent years building a reputation, a career, a persona, and Olivia had dismantled it all in less than 10 minutes, not with cruelty or vengeance, but simply with the truth. In the months that followed, the story of that night spread far beyond the immediate circle who'd witnessed it. It became one of those cautionary tales people shared, a reminder of how quickly arrogance could turn to ash. Trevor's career never recovered. The investigation revealed a pattern of behavior. inappropriate comments to female colleagues, credit taken for other people's work. A trail of small cruelties that had been overlooked because he was good at his job and brought in clients. But once people started looking, really looking, the facade crumbled completely. He was terminated from Morgan & Associates 3 months after the party. Other firms wouldn't touch him. His name had become synonymous with a particular kind of toxic masculinity, the kind that blamed others for personal failings, that tore down to build up. In professional circles, he became an example of what not to do, how not to be. Olivia, meanwhile, thrived. The viral video of her walking into Trevor's party with her 4 babies made her something of a folk hero, particularly among women who'd been blamed for relationship failures that weren't their fault. She was interviewed by several major publications, not because she sought the attention, but because her story resonated with so many people who'd been made to feel less than, inadequate, broken. She used the unexpected platform to advocate for better fertility education, for the importance of mental health support for people struggling with infertility, for the need to challenge the narratives that place the burden of reproductive issues primarily on women. She spoke at conferences, wrote articles, became a voice for those who'd been silenced by shame and stigma. The quadruplets, now 9 months old, were thriving. Olivia had moved into a larger apartment in Brooklyn with the help of her family and a supportive community of other parents she'd met through support groups. The days were exhausting, chaotic, filled with the constant demands of 4 infants. But there was joy in the chaos, purpose in the exhaustion. She'd found herself in the rubble of her broken marriage, discovered a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She'd also found love again, though it was early yet. A pediatrician named Isaiah, whom she'd met at the baby's 6-month checkup. He was patient, kind, with warm brown eyes and hands gentle enough to soothe a crying infant, but strong enough to carry 2 car seats at once. He made her laugh, treated her children as if they were precious, and never once made her feel like she had to be anything other than exactly who she was. On a cool October evening, exactly 1 year after the party that had changed everything, Olivia sat in a rocking chair in the nursery she'd painted a soft sage green. 2 of the babies were asleep in their cribs, their breathing soft and synchronized. The other 2 were cradled in her arms, fighting sleep with the determined fussiness of overtired infants. Through the window, she could see the Brooklyn skyline, the lights of Manhattan glittering in the distance. She thought about Trevor briefly, wondering if he ever thought about her, about the life they could have had if he'd been honest, if he'd been kind. But the thought passed quickly, replaced by the weight of the babies in her arms, the sound of their breathing, the miracle of their existence. She'd learned something crucial in the year since that confrontation. Her worth had never been tied to her ability to have children, or to Trevor's approval, or to anyone else's validation. Those things were gifts when freely given, but they weren't the measure of her value as a person. She was enough, had always been enough. With or without the babies, with or without a partner, with or without success or recognition or vindication. The babies finally drifted off to sleep. Their tiny faces relaxed into expressions of perfect peace. Olivia carefully placed them in their cribs, tucking the blankets around them with practiced care. She stood for a moment, watching them breathe, feeling the fierce protective love that had transformed her life. Her phone buzzed softly. A text from Isaiah. "How are my favorite 5 people? Need me to bring dinner?" She smiled, typing back, "We're good, but dinner sounds perfect. Thank you." As she left the nursery, pulling the door most of the way closed, she felt something she hadn't felt in years during her marriage to Trevor. Contentment. Not the frantic, fragile happiness that depended on external validation, but a deep bone-level satisfaction with her life, her choices, her path forward. The story of that night at Trevor's party would follow her for a long time, probably forever. People would always know her as the woman who walked into her ex-husband's celebration with proof of his lies. But increasingly, she was becoming known for what came after, the grace with which she'd handled her unexpected platform, the advocacy work she'd taken on, the way she'd transformed pain into purpose. She'd received hundreds of messages from people who'd seen the video or read the interviews, people who'd been gaslit, blamed, made to feel inadequate for circumstances beyond their control. "You gave me the courage to leave. You helped me see I wasn't crazy. You saved my life." Each message was a reminder that her decision to confront Trevor hadn't been just about her own vindication. It had been about breaking a silence that had imprisoned countless others. There were hard days still, moments when the weight of single parenthood felt crushing. When she woke at 3 a.m. to 4 crying babies and wondered how she'd make it through. There were nights when loneliness crept in, when she mourned not the marriage she'd had, but the one she'd hoped for, the partnership that had turned out to be an illusion. But those moments passed, and what remained was something real and solid, a life built on truth rather than lies, on self-knowledge rather than external approval, on the understanding that she was the author of her own story, not a supporting character in someone else's narrative. 2 years later, Olivia stood in a lecture hall at Columbia University, invited to speak to a class on family law about her experience with reproductive coercion and gaslighting in marriage. The quadruplets, now 2 years old and impossibly energetic, were with her mother for the afternoon. Isaiah sat in the back row, having taken the afternoon off from his practice to support her. As she told her story, she watched the faces of the young law students, saw recognition dawn in some eyes, anger in others, determination in many. These were the people who would shape the legal landscape around fertility, divorce, parental rights. These were the people who might help ensure that others didn't suffer the way she had. After the lecture, a young woman approached her, her dark eyes filled with tears. "My husband blames me for our infertility," she whispered. "Says I'm not a real woman. I thought I was alone. I thought there was something wrong with me. But hearing you, seeing what you survived and how you came out the other side, it gives me hope. It makes me think I can leave too." Olivia took the woman's hands in hers, held them tight. "You can," she said firmly. "You're not broken. You're not less than. And you deserve someone who treats you with respect and honesty. It won't be easy, but I promise you it's worth it. You're worth it." As Olivia left the university that evening, Isaiah's hand warm in hers, the autumn air crisp with the promise of winter, she felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for Trevor's cruelty, which she would never excuse or minimize, but for the strength it had forced her to discover. She'd been broken down to her foundation and had rebuilt herself into someone stronger, more authentic, more whole. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Another message, this one from a woman in Texas who'd just left her emotionally abusive husband, crediting Olivia's story as the catalyst for her courage. Olivia saved the message, added it to the folder she kept of such testimonials. On the hardest days, when doubt crept in, she read through them, reminded herself that her pain had not been pointless. That suffering transformed into purpose was perhaps the most profound kind of alchemy. The quadruplets were waiting when she got home, sticky-faced and wild-haired, launching themselves at her with the fearless affection of toddlers who knew they were loved absolutely. She scooped them up, 2 at a time, spinning them around until they shrieked with laughter. Her mother watched from the kitchen doorway, her expression soft with pride. "You did good today?" her mother asked. "I did good," Olivia confirmed, settling onto the floor as the children swarmed over her, demanding stories and snacks and attention. "I think I'm finally doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing." That night, after the children were asleep and Isaiah had gone home and the apartment was quiet, Olivia sat at her laptop responding to messages, planning future speaking engagements, working on an article about reproductive rights and medical autonomy. The work was important, fulfilling in ways her old corporate job had never been, but more than that, it was hers. Built by her, shaped by her values, a direct expression of who she'd become through trial and transformation. No one could take it from her, or diminish it, or claim credit for her achievements. It was the life she'd built from the ashes of the one Trevor had tried to destroy. And it was more than enough. It was everything. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own strength or inspired you to reclaim your truth, please consider subscribing to this channel and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the stories we most need are the ones that remind us we're not alone, that survival is possible, that redemption and peace can be found even after the deepest betrayals. Your support helps us continue sharing these important narratives. Like, comment, and let us know your thoughts. Thank you for being part of this community.